I think of your funding working group as an agile working group where there were a number of you that convened around that specific time, discrete purpose. And then it replaces the language that prescribed a working group structure by giving the leadership team that discretion and flexibility. So those are the significant changes in this section. Before I move on, are there any questions about the working group structure? Yes?
I have a question about something that was previous in the charter before the working group structure.
Yes.
Specifically naming the executive leadership team with names rather than categories of there will be an industry person, there will be, an education person, etc. I've never seen a charter that specifically names people before versus what you want them to do or be. So I just thought that was a little exceptional, and I wondered if there was thinking around why.
It's a great point. We've done the same with the commission leadership, WTDB leadership, and staff. We'll probably rethink that because you're probably right that positional description makes more sense. I don't know that I have strong feelings one way or the other. If folks would prefer that we move to positional references, we can certainly do that throughout the document.
My recommendation would just be to do positional, because then it doesn't trigger a charter revision and update that has to be voted on if someone transitions. It stands the test of time a little bit more with more durability.
And then you can reference a document that has the current members, and that can change without having to change the structure.
That's one suggestion. Any questions? All right, so.
I also had a
Yes.
suggestion in that same section. Putting on my sort of workforce board hat, I feel like the workforce board.
Can Brooke, sorry, Deb, can you pass that down? Thank you. You might have to turn it on, Brooke.
No,
Yes.
okay, sorry, my husband's having surgery on Thursday, so we are like, all the things to
Yeah.
not have to reschedule for the surgery that cancel my So in the same section, with my workforce board hat on, I feel like a workforce board is missing from this executive leadership, so we have that connection between the workforce system and the work that we're doing at the executive leadership level.
I appreciate that. This is actually spelled out in statute, the membership of the executive leadership team, and then the membership of the consortium itself. And in the membership of the consortium, it's called out that there would be, we've determined 2 representatives of local workforce boards as members of the consortium, but certainly open to having a conversation. It would expand the leadership team rather than replace.
Yeah, definitely.
Any discussion? Are you wanting to make a motion to amend the executive leadership team?
Yes, I would. I think it's important to have that connection.
Discussion.
I've got just a quick question, if I could. Did you say it's established in statute?
The membership of the leadership team is in statute, so we would be expanding.
The legislature finds out for some other means to go to the legislature and have them amend it to accomplish.
I don't know, that's a great question, what the process for that would be.
I guess the question is it defined as have to, minimum have to have this, or is it is this?
I'm probably need to follow up on those specifics.
And Andrew, as the workforce board executive director, if you disagree with me, feel free to say so. My chair workforce board hat says that's not.
I'm with you. Second.
Okay, I can certainly explore what what mechanism is required, if that requires statutory amendment, or if that's something that we have the flexibility to entertain here. So I think that's probably something that I will have to follow up on. I'm not sure that we can make that decision here today.
I guess that other question would be, are there other ways for engagement, so that we wouldn't have to pursue the statutory changes? Yeah, just thinking about sort of what all the options are for the workforce. Engaged.
Yeah, and the local workforce boards are called out as members of the
Right.
consortium.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that was very deliberate having in there.
Okay, so I do hear a motion and a second, and I think we probably need to table that just to determine what the path forward is. And then, I think the consortium will need to decide whether to pause advancing the charter writ large when we come to the end. But I've captured that in terms of proposed changes. Okay, anything else on working groups? I think Laura is the next slide, is membership terms. Okay, membership terms were not in the original charter, were not contemplated as part of the launch. So this is a new section. We are proposing that we would implement 3-year terms, that new members would be appointed, would be recommended to the executive leadership team for appointment, and that there would be no term limits. For you all as originating members, we would apply staggering terms so that you don't all come to the end of your 3-year term simultaneously. So to ensure continuity of membership, and then this section of the charter also emphasizes the importance of membership in good standing. We have indicated that membership in good standing requires attendance at a minimum of 3 meetings per year, so 3 of the 4 quarterly meetings. Attendance at in-person meetings is preferred, though virtual attendance is normally an option for members under extenuating circumstances. Many of you maybe have identified an alternate. In some cases, both the member and the alternate attend regularly for continuity of representation in extenuating circumstances. But it's important to note that an alternate should not replace the voting member, but rather should represent them. As I said, members and their alternates are both invited to attend and participate in consortium meetings and working groups, but only voting members would participate in action items. I think that is the bulk of the membership terms section. It does talk a little bit about the importance of equitable participation in decision-making and the importance of representative, engaged representation as a part of equitable participation. But certainly happy to entertain any questions or concerns about the membership terms section.
Question?
Yes?
So the use of the term voting members versus members, the difference?
If they would be interchangeable. So a consortium member is a voting member, unless we're designating an alternate in extenuating circumstances. But the member themselves is the voting member. And in those cases where we have 2 representatives from an organization, I think we have crosswalked that with all of the organizations to make sure that we've identified the voting member and the alternate. Any other questions about membership terms? All right. The next new section is the equity statement and group agreement agreements. Next slide, please. This section does pull out some pieces that were in the original charter, but more explicitly states how the consortium will employ HEC's equity lens in our work. It includes HEC's equity stance and refers to group agreements. We discussed group agreements all the way back when we launched this work and haven't revisited that. So I anticipate that between now and our next meeting, we'll be working with the leadership team to identify some group agreements that we can embed in our work at the beginning of every meeting. But this, calling this section out explicitly, is intended to remind us of our North Star in this work. Are there any questions about this section?
Did we cover the previous section, purpose and scope, that was between terms and equity? Or is that?
We did not, but there isn't anything substantively different. I did move a couple of bullets from another section that was eliminated. All right, next slide, please. Moving into timeline and deliverables. Essentially, the update here is that we've added the medium-term objectives. The original charter really focused on short-term and long-term persistent. We're going to be talking a little bit more about medium-term objectives today. Went into those in more detail last time we met, but we felt that it was important to embed them here. Medium-term objectives most specifically include establishing that work group structure because of how we changed that in the charter, and then establishing success metrics, which are outlined here to include performance measures for the high-tech workforce system and collective impact measures that the consortium will use to hold itself accountable. And these will be measures that we'll be developing as a group in the coming year. And then I'll just keep us moving into the meeting schedule. So noting Melissa's comment earlier about names, we will replace the contributing staff section based on your recommendation to just be positional. And then the meeting schedule, ironically, we did similarly where we removed the specific dates, meeting dates, and just put the meeting cadence. Our intention is that we will move to 3 quarterly meetings being in person and 1 quarterly meeting, likely your winter meeting will move to virtual, fully online, again, to help improve with accessibility of the meetings. So likely your winter meeting will be held entirely virtually. 3 quarterly meetings will be held in person, and then reiterating that where in-person attendance is required or requested, the HEC may be able to reimburse for travel. Are there any questions about timeline, deliverables, or meeting schedule and accessibility? If not, then we'll move to the next slide, which is the last substantive update, and this is where we really built out the decision-making and accountability portion of the charter to include the process that you all went through in your first decision-making process, detailing the consensus-based approach that you took to advancing the criteria recommendations. The charter now spells out that you will advance decisions by consensus. If the leadership team concludes that unanimous consensus is not possible, they can advance a majority vote, and reiterates that a quorum must be present for the consensus process and the majority vote. And that quorum will be achieved when a simple majority of the voting members are present, either in person or virtual. I think it was this meeting where we had a chunk of folks that had to participate virtually in our vote on the criteria, and that was all extenuating circumstances, but the ability to vote through that process allowed us to advance with consensus. So we wanted to make sure we retained that flexibility. Any questions about decision-making and accountability? That really is the last of the recommendations for the charter update. So with the amendment to replace any name-specific with positional descriptions in the charter, and then with the question about expanding the leadership team to include a local workforce board, I would look to you all, maybe fearless leadership team, how you would prefer to proceed in terms of, next slide please, in terms of approving the revisions and formally adopting the charter today or waiting. Adopting as amended with a pause on the change that needs more research, or pausing on approving the charter altogether.
I would like to propose, since everyone's here, and I hate to be hashing things and going over again, that we can adopt everything with the name change or title change to swap out names, with the caveat that we're gonna revisit the membership on the executive leadership team at the next meeting.
Just a quick question regarding the swapping of the names. To be consistent, should that also apply to the staff?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. So I have a motion to proceed with adopting the charter with the revision of removing name-specific references with title or position. And then Kat, I heard you second. Yes, okay, and then with a commitment to revisiting the membership of the leadership team at our next meeting. Any questions or discussion?
The only question I have, Jennifer, is, given this establishes a quorum as a simple majority online, how is it currently established in terms of quorum? And I assume we have that today.
Yes, I should have asked staff to affirm that we have a quorum present, but I'm sure they're both gonna look at me like this because I'm not sure I gave that assignment to someone in Ronan's absence. We will confirm. By default, public meeting laws require that a quorum or simple majority be present to vote. I don't believe we have any voting members listening in, to the degree that they can watch and not listen. And I do believe that we have a quorum present, but I don't know if someone has done
I
that.
believe so, we're verifying right now.
Okay.
Yes, we have a quorum
We have a
present.
quorum present. Thank you for keeping us honest. Okay, any questions or discussion? We don't have red, yellow, green cards to indicate quorum, but, indicate consensus, but is everyone comfortable with us advancing as recommended? All right, excellent. That's your second decision. That's very exciting. Okay, so our medium-term objectives, which is essentially over the next year of the consortium, so through December of 2025, is to continue to make strategic, sector-specific policy recommendations to the Workforce and Talent Development Board and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And as I mentioned in the charter update, I'll be working with the leadership team to recommend a standing work group structure. And I would love for y'all to be thinking about that today in terms of what are some of the priorities that you'd like this consortia to dig into in the medium term. I think that will help inform the work group structure. And then we'll be talking about success measures, both from a performance and a collective impact perspective. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide was presented to you at the last meeting. A little bit of a timeline for the balance of this year. We have been conducting some employer focus groups and working on performance metrics. The Workforce and Talent Development Board recently completed the statewide talent assessment, which is something that we might like to dig into a little bit more. And in the coming months, as I mentioned, learning more from the employer focus groups, launching work groups, and doing some priority setting as we look into 2025. Next slide, please. So our process or approach to the industry consortia is really that we've spent the better part of the last year building our collective learning, understanding the landscape in terms of technology workforce needs, understanding the state's economy and how that relates to the high-tech workforce needs. We talked a little bit about defining what is the tech sector, and then we've been learning about projects and other programs or parallel efforts to, again, build on our collective learning. The intention is that that then helps to inform our planning with some basic principles and gives us then a platform to act on emergent priorities. Next slide, please. This is sort of the same approach that you all took to your the funding criteria recommendations that you all made. We learned from data. We used those then to inform with some principles, and then you all as a consortium acted on your recommendations for that next round of funding. Some examples of the learning that we've done, the funding work group priorities that emerged were around career advancement, the importance of upskilling and reskilling the workforce with technology skills, and the importance of recruiting into the tech workforce, expanding education and training programs, and building awareness for career exploration. The principles that we have been applying, and maybe this is the first time that we've tried to articulate that in a way that is meaningful for the consortium writ large, is that our work is informed by data. And so particularly the work that we have been doing over the last year informed by employment department data, informed by other data that's been presented on behalf of the sector, and then leaning into emerging opportunities that are identified by the consortium, informed by industry, and then also thinking about where the consortium can add a unique lens through this shared, through this shared leadership model, and where we can add value to an issue or an emerging opportunity. And then opportunities to align with the governor's priorities. Those are some of our planning principles. And then how do we take what we're learning and apply those principles and then act on emerging priorities? And so the ongoing employer input and engagement, I'll just mention to you that the industry focus groups that the consortium have sponsored, we've completed the healthcare. I don't think I have a slide on this. I'm just gonna, we do have a slide on this. I won't get ahead of myself. So employer input and engagement, opportunities to continue learning from Future Ready Oregon grantees, and then what are other emerging priorities from our learning from the collective of the consortium that we might be acting on. The other shared learning, which is the next slide, that I wanted to draw out are some of, yes, Melissa.
Sorry, can you go back a slide? I'm ruminating on the
Yes.
It feels like there's an opportunistic ability to align with governor priorities. But it feels like governors change and their priorities may not be the priorities of this consortia. It would then beg a question for me twofold. One is the temporal nature of that bullet. And then also, is there an opportunity for us to inform the governor's priorities? Is it a two-way street or is it just a one-way street? Just questions for consideration.
Great questions and thoughts.
I love the idea of aligning and informing, as you're saying, the two ways. Because it's important to align with them. But the idea that this consortium can also inform, perhaps advocate, when, especially as we move into act on some of those emerging priorities.
I think align and inform could maybe be more explicitly stated. I think the inform happens through this body's advisory capacity to the commission and the Workforce and Talent Development Board, and then directly as you all are engaged in other activities. But certainly welcome the idea of expanding this more explicitly. Thank you. Great questions. Okay, I wanted to pull out some of the additional learning that we've been doing together. I'm sure maybe some of you revisit the agenda and meeting materials for all of our meetings, but maybe not as frequently as we do. So I wanted to pull out some highlights. Early on, we talked a lot about defining the tech sector and the high-tech workforce. I think this is a space where this consortium has departed a little bit from your colleagues in healthcare and manufacturing, where you've focused more on the workforce needs, the skills and abilities in tech across all sectors, and that has been something that has emerged as important in your conversations. And I think it's a both and, because you're also talking about the tech sector from a state perspective and how we can be supporting that work. And I think as we talk today about some of the clean tech work, it's a good example of where, again, it's that align and inform, it's a bit of a both and. But we spent a bit of time at the front end defining the scope of your work more specifically in response to the workforce needs, skills, and abilities in tech. We heard from Oregon's broadband office a little bit more about broadband expansion, and when Daniel was with us, he talked also about some of the challenges and opportunities that they've identified in terms of workforce needs for broadband expansion. Last time we met, we heard about artificial intelligence and digital literacy, the workforce implications. That's certainly a theme that's woven throughout our work and was identified as some of the transferable technology skills in our initial criteria recommendations for the tech funding. We've heard from Department of Education about the CTE state plan. We're going to hear today more about the governor's Clean Tech Task Force and Business Oregon's work around technology. And then we're going to hear from the Workforce and Talent Development Board about some of their work around essential employability skills and the Oregon employability skills. So these are some of the things that we've learned collectively that might continue to inform our work. Have I missed anything in terms of our collective learning?
It might be because it might be a different workforce committee that I sat in. But didn't Jill cover and talk about CBES, was that this committee? And that we have 67% of our schools offer computer science, and only 4% participation rate.
Different committee.
We might at some point want to think about how we have
Definitely, so she's definitely advocating.
Yeah, but there's just that we will get a little bit of data and input on the runways of coming into digital literacy maybe. And
Okay.
where we stand today, and so that we can maybe set some goals from that.
And I love that, thinking about what's missing, not only from the perspective of have we had collective learning that I missed, but also are there other issues, other content matter, other data that you all would like for your shared learning?
Well, I'll go back, and I don't know if Todd knows in the room yet, but that gap tool where we need to, hi Todd, the Corey tool, what Washington STEM built, so where we can use the economic department's data on jobs and job run rates, understanding the shifts in AI, which is fascinating, how you're gonna do that. But then being able to have a really rapid identification tool that shows where we have gaps in programs of study, so post-secondary apprenticeship programs. I think that tool will be so invaluable in Washington STEM. Just gave us case studies where it was used in 100 legislative committee meetings in the previous session. And that's a $50,000 tool that I just think we really need to figure out how we're gonna develop for our state.
Well, and I'm not familiar with the tool, but the applicability is much of what's built into the charge for this group is what are those skills, what are those occupations, where do we have education and training assets, where are there gaps? And that could be program gaps, that could be geographic gaps in terms of availability and accessibility of programs, and what are the implications of that. So absolutely within the scope of work for this. Okay, well, I continue to encourage all of you, if there are either presentations that you want for your added shared learning or additional data that would be helpful for you all, to share those with us so we can make sure that's available to you. The next slide, I think, is looking at employer engagement. So thinking twofold about ongoing ensuring that our work is informed by industry and employers. We have employers represented at the industry consortia table, and what we've heard from you all and your colleagues in healthcare manufacturing is that we need additional ways to hear directly from employers more collectively. And so we launched a series of industry focus groups that have been happening over the summer. The healthcare focus groups are complete. We held, I believe, 7 across the state. We held 5 manufacturing focus groups across the state and 4 tech across the state. We still have a couple more in manufacturing, a couple more, one more in technology, and we have been working with a consultant to do that work, and really focused on how are employers defining workforce demand, defining their workforce needs, both in terms of positions, occupations, vacancies, projecting vacancies, but also the types of skills and credentials, having conversations about what are high-value credentials, where are there education and training gaps, and then also focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, and then for tech, but also in healthcare manufacturing, we've embedded questions about the role of AI, the future of work as it relates to technology, which I think will continue to inform the work of this group. The consultant will be summarizing that work both by industry sector and by geographic region across the state, and at your October meeting, you'll have a presentation from them on the focus group findings with employers. So more to come there, but acknowledging that continuing to find ways for employers to inform your work is, we've heard loud and clear, is a priority for this group. Next slide, please. And then continuing to engage in opportunities to hear from and learn from Future Ready Oregon grantees. You may remember we've hosted some facilitated panels from grantees. I don't remember if it was your kickoff meeting or maybe your first meeting. It was I think it was at Mount Hood Community College, where we heard from a panel of grantees about programs and projects and partnerships in technology and helping to identify barriers and opportunities in both program delivery and participant engagement. We'll continue to look for ways to engage grantees in your collective learning and what's working. We've talked about hosting one meeting annually virtually. We also would like to suggest that one quarterly meeting be held in another part of the state. The September healthcare meeting is going to be held in Medford, and we'll focus on providing a bit of a intro to some of the projects and programs in the Rogue Valley. And so we would like to also consider having one of your meetings in another part of the state where we can explore potentially site visits and learning from organizations in that region. We'll continue to report on the outcomes for Future Ready Oregon, specifically workforce ready grants that are specific to the 3 sectors. And that annual report is currently being developed and due at the end of this year. And then the most recent round of grant making, that application period just closed, and we anticipate those awards will be made this fall, and we'll continue then over the next couple of years to hear from grantees, particularly in the technology space, about outcomes. All right, so that brings us to the end of the overview of our midterm objectives. Are there any questions? I think in summary, we're definitely going to be working on a work group structure and some performance measures. We're absolutely going to continue to look for ways to be informed, industry informed, and to learn from community and grantees about barriers and opportunities. And part of that work involves system partner updates here. And you're all ready to be done hearing from me today. We're going to move into a presentation about the Governor's Clean Tech Task Force and some of the work around clean tech in Oregon. But before we do that, are there any questions about our collective learning principles and how we might be thinking about priorities moving into next year? Yes?
I have a question. The more we're talking about kind of like how we're doing this in comparison to like how the both the healthcare and the manufacturing consortium are doing it, I was just, is that?
There.
I was just thinking that it might be beneficial for us to not know like what they're doing or what they're talking about, but kind of the priorities that they have as well, because tech so deeply integrates with those industries as well. So especially, I mean, I'd say especially on both sides, but like especially me thinking about it too from a lens of like the company I work for is a manufacturer as well, and Intel too, right? So we're tech, but we're also like manufacturer tech. So it'd be cool to hear what kind of their priorities are, how things overlap, where are we in the Venn diagram of all of those things too. So.
It's such a great point, and as we further I'm looking at Todd behind me, our Workforce and Talent Development Board Director, looking for ways that we're integrating with that statewide, non-sector specific lens and what the state's priorities are around workforce and talent development. I know one of the things that your leadership team has been asking for is the opportunity to convene with the leaders of the other consortium, and I think those are ways that we can start to build in. I can tell you that in healthcare, they're going down a pretty occupation pathway specific trajectory. So in the medium term, they have established a working group that's going to specifically be looking at nursing pathways, and another that will specifically be looking at behavioral health. And the complexity of healthcare workforce really lends itself to that. And they're gonna really be diving into what are the career laddering, the education pathways, digging into those more specifically. But to your point, I think there are ways to cross-pollinate, not just between the three sectors, but also with the state's Workforce and Talent Development Board, and looking for sort of shared opportunities, as well as where are those uniquenesses where you can dig in a little bit more deeply.
And where could they potentially, where could they potentially rub up against each other in a negative way too, right? Like if we're working to develop these roles that technology development is wonderful in a lot of ways, but if it's going to take away opportunities in the manufacturing, like then we're in contra to each other, and it's not necessarily when we everything kind of like bolstering each other, and also it not be a surprise to be like, hey, your buddies over here we're working on this thing, and now it's the shocker that like deeper down the road initiatives maybe by our group and by other groups too, like we're not the most powerful people in the room or in the world always, but I think when we're not working, making sure that our objectives aren't kind of like long-term working against the good of the group. So, yeah.
Only thing to add is that technology has a huge role to play in both manufacturing and healthcare careers.
While you were talking, Jennifer, about the quarterly meetings and the healthcare doing the tours and stuff, I was thinking about how it could be really beneficial to have sort of the consortium of consortiums. You might even think about one of those meetings where all the consortia can come together. Excuse me. And there could be times when they meet individually, but also to do some of the sharing we're talking about. It sounds like the leadership teams have wanted to get together. But I think there's so much that can be learned from those other strategies. We can be thinking collectively too about how to inform priorities, how to think about, the most strategic kinds of recommendations and roles to play. So just something to think about.
Do I need the microphone for the recording?
Well, it's not for the recording, but it's just, I don't want to discriminate against people who are speaking softly.
So Todd, we have that I used AI, shared it with Todd, so we called it the WTDB ODE CHIPS Infrastructure Workforce Development Crosswalk. Because I listed the 13 groups I sit on. So we built it, would love for those in the room to look at it, and its goals, imperatives, alignment to other work, the data, the strategies to implement, the metrics to measure, the funding, the resource support, the partner and community engagement, the eval and iteration, and the comms and collaboration. So it's really can be done in a spreadsheet. It's just who will look at all of these from WTDB, Future Ready Oregon, CTE, at that ODE level, all the way down into CHIPS, infrastructure, clean energy. We're all doing incredible work, but it feels like we aren't communicating what are the goals, what are the imperatives, and really where are the investment, what are we going to come and bring forward to our legislature and our governor of what our recommendations are. I think we'd be foolish if we don't set up some kind of crosswalk where we're tracking that. And just looking at our charter, have we lined out in this group our goals? have we worked out our imperatives, and then maybe this whole gray column is for HEC staff and ODE staff to do the cross-pollinating, because we don't all sit on those committees. So what are the alignments to other work? And then get to those data pieces, so. I'm gonna leave it with Todd, because that's, I think, where it's sitting right now.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think in our breakout conversations later today, to be thinking about what are the goals, where does this group provide value add, and where might there be an opportunity for this group to sort of be the unique space where we bring some of those things forward. Okay, excellent discussion. I think we're gonna go ahead and move into the clean tech section. I'm trying to see, we're only 30 minutes behind schedule, but it's fine. We are going to switch gears to a presentation. I think Skip and Brooke are going to share an overview of the governor's Clean Tech Task Force and some of the draft recommendations that are coming out of that group. And then followed by Jeff will be presenting on the state's Clean Tech Economic Development Study. And then what we'll probably do is reverse order, have you take a quick break and then come back and do some small group conversation.
Great, thanks. Brooke and I will be really fast and succinct. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So this is a map of the clean tech manufacturing announcements since the Inflation Reduction Act was put into law. And Oregon's not on the map. Our charge at the Clean Tech Task Force was really to figure out how to change that, right? So we wanted to make sure that we're focused on what are the ways that Oregon can better be positioned to leverage some of that federal money, which is actually a larger pot of money even than was available for the CHIPS Act. So 60 billion versus 40 billion federally. And of course, there's a lot of private investment that is unlocked with this type of federal money now on the table. We're looking beyond the federal funding landscape to also see how, in a more sustainable, ongoing way, Oregon can continue to leverage philanthropic sources, private sector sources of investment, and potentially down the road, other sources of federal. We go to the next slide. So here, again, another sort of slide to announce the fact, or at least emphasize the fact that Oregon only had one project and no money attached to it in the more recent round of IRA funding. So again, we're going to be trying to correct this. Next slide. And in terms of goals, which we were just talking about for this group as well, there's a real surge right now in capital investment going into clean tech manufacturing. It's been one of the hottest areas of venture investments in the last year or so, in what most people, an environment most people would describe as kind of mixed in terms of overall venture funding. Thousands of jobs attached to it, paying good wages. And we have a nice foundation on which to build here in Oregon. And there's also a lot of tie-ins with the sort of workforce and the manufacturing infrastructure that already exists here when it comes to semiconductor R&D and production that are also very relevant to the clean tech manufacturing space. So we've got a lot to be excited about there from a talent standpoint. If we go to the next slide. So some of the stronger opportunities, this is also reflected in some of the work that exists and federal funding that we've gotten too from different pots of money related to the PowerEyes Northwest Consortium, centered here at Portland State University, but involving a lot of higher ed partners, private sector, and nonprofits. And battery manufacturing, we have ESS, QPO, Powen, and Zinc 5, as well as others. Also the floating offshore wind supply, electric mobility, and then of course solar cell manufacturing is probably the squishiest of these opportunities. We do have some stuff here on which to build and to get excited about, but a lot of this depends on essentially foreign trade and geopolitical concerns, which could tip it one way or the other. Go to the next slide. This is kind of a info graphic that shows the strategy framework for the approach of the task force. We have essentially 5 or so work groups or subcommittees that are focused on a variety of different inputs. Talent and workforce being one of them, and we'll be shifting to that in a second. We're also going to just quickly at the end talk about some of the draft recommendations that are coming out of some of the other ones. In terms of our work plan going forward, the recommendations from the task force will be finalized by mid-September and then shared with the governor and members of the legislature going forward with an eye toward the 2025 legislative session.
As far as the workforce subcommittee, one of the things we started with is kind of building a better understanding of what already exists. So the focus of this is not to duplicate efforts, but really fill in the gaps of what's missing. We have kind of drilled down our recommendations to 4 major things. Collaboration and partnership is really focused on how do we get all the right players at the table to work together. One of the things we heard from industry is that because this specific part of the industry is changing so rapidly, that the training programs that are available are not meeting employer needs, and employers are having to create their own training programs, which is really expensive and costly, and that ramp-up time for employers is a lot longer. So we heard from ESS, and I think the ramp-up time for a regular kind of more entry level was like 12 months, and then if you're one of their project engineers, it's like 12 to 18 months. That's a really long time to have somebody who's not producing for you at the highest level. So how are we collectively working together to think about those partnerships across labor, public agencies, employers, universities, K through 12, workforce boards, etc. The second piece is around coordination and technical assistance, and this is really looking at how do we better equip and fund our public workforce system to be supporting kind of those existing training programs. How are we supporting employers, and then looking at ways in which we're exploring high road training partnerships or other types of kind of programs that are in place that support high wages, high quality training programs that benefit both the employer and the worker. And then on the scalability side, really again to that point earlier of not duplicating efforts, looking at how you can leverage existing registered apprenticeship programs, and then where there are needs for new apprenticeship programs, identifying what those look like. Also doing a strong focus on upskilling and reskilling. And then there has been some kind of examples and talked about other states have been doing something specifically in California, so how can we learn from what has been done in other states to potentially bring up here? And then the last piece is around good jobs, which we've kind of identified. The Department of Labor has established some quality jobs, good jobs principles. The Portland Metro workforce boards have also developed quality jobs framework. I like to say that we did it first. But same general idea, which is, around like how are you ensuring opportunities for advancement, living wages, fair scheduling, etc. So still kind of in draft form, but close to being done, and those will go back up to the full task force on Wednesday. Wednesday for recommendation.
Thanks, Brooke. And then just quickly go, to this one. So research, innovation, entrepreneurship committee recommendations. Out of that was a recommendation we look at a 10-year kind of aspirational goal of $1 billion public-private commitment. The focus there is really around the learnings from a look at what other states are doing. So Massachusetts, by way of example, has roughly 4 times the size of Oregon's GDP. So they put well over $1 billion committed into supporting essentially clean tech companies, both from formation to growth and beyond. And looking at how to kind of right-size that for Oregon, if we were to look at a public-private partnership, and you take $1 billion as your starting point, half of that's $500 million. So $500 million from public, $500 million from private sources like philanthropic, corporate, et cetera. And the idea would be about $50 million a year would be the public sector commitment. Again, kind of more right-sized for Oregon, putting us equivalent to at least the Massachusetts one, which is seen as kind of a national leader. And so there's a lot that needs to happen here, including multiple revisions. So who knows what the final number is going to be, but that was at least something that came out in early discussions as something that would be interesting. Of course, the legislature can't commit to anything beyond a single biennium in terms of funding, so there'd be incremental kind of steps here. How's it going? Is it working? Is it not? Maybe it's going so well that the legislature decides in the future they want to increase it. Maybe they decrease in certain other areas. So I think it's at least it starts some conversations going that hopefully are well received by legislative leadership and the governor. And then we also talked about the need to prioritize clean tech centers, and this could potentially be even done as part of the existing centers of innovation excellence within Business Oregon. That way you're not creating a whole new regime or framework to essentially staff and administer something like this. But the idea would be geographic diversity, as well as potential to serve disadvantaged communities as well. Again, focusing on some of those core strengths that were highlighted earlier in terms of areas where Oregon's potentially strong relative to other states when it comes to clean tech manufacturing. And then finally, a principle of co-developing investment strategies with disadvantaged communities around the state and using emerging data on best practices to ensure that economic development is welcomed, inclusive, and successful. Obviously, there's been some examples of this well-intentioned effort and nothing to show for it, and so I think there's an opportunity to kind of get this right. There are some interesting studies done by the Pew Foundation and others that I think are potentially instructive here. And then finally, the Regulations, Incentives, and Procurement Committee. That one, again, dovetails kind of nicely with the Research and Innovation and Entrepreneurship Committee. So this is the next slide. And what we did with this committee was we looked at also making sure to recommend that we preserve the existing tools in our toolbox and also potentially expand or enhance some of them. So an enhancement example would be e-zones, right? There's been some issues that are problematic and some changes more recently in terms of how those are administered. So could we get those back to a point where they're a little bit more robust? Strategic Reserve Fund already exists, could it be expanded? And looking at things like expansion of the R&D tax credit, which was passed last year to support semiconductor manufacturing, could it also include clean tech manufacturing? Most states that do have an R&D tax credit, which is most of them, it essentially applies across the board to any R&D activity. Do we go that route? So there's a lot of open questions still with some of these, but these were some of the ideas from members of the committee that were put forward. And then also establishing a clean tech supercluster. So to essentially tackle a number of things related to talent, workforce, supportive policy environment, and also looking at things like essentially expanding markets and cultivating partnerships and collaboration. And then also looking at things like an accelerator, venture studio. And these are, again, elements of these programs already exist in bits and pieces in Oregon. And so it's less about spinning up a lot of stuff from scratch and also about more aligning existing resources in a more cohesive way. And then finally, again, the same principle applied here with respect to co-development and an eye toward making sure disadvantaged communities have every opportunity to take advantage of any opportunities that are presented through this package. And that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Any questions about the task force before Jeff jumps into his presentation? How long have y'all been meeting? Did you say?
Beginning of the summer. Just a lot of work in a
Yeah.
short period. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Okay, then Jeff, I think we're gonna turn it over to
Right.
you. We should probably give you a microphone.
I'll grab that. All right, well, that was Skip and Brooke, super helpful for me to hear, and I really appreciate it. What I've put together is just a quick overview, and I'll move through these quickly as well, of our agency, our sort of what we do, who we are. I'll move through those very quickly, and then talk a little bit about the clean tech study that we've engaged in. We began it really in earnest late spring, so just before the clean tech task force was formed. We had also, as an agency, begun a clean tech study, taken on that work. There you go. All right, I was at a meeting on Thursday last week and thank you, Dr. Scari, for hosting that. It was an East Multnomah County group of folks talking about economic development and community development and the future of East Multnomah County. And one of the things that came up in that meeting was, as folks were talking through economic development strategies or other specific industry strategies, it became clear not everybody knows all the acronyms. Not everyone speaks that same language. So I put this slide in here just so you'd know what I meant. If I mentioned traded sector, those are really export-oriented industries. If you think about those companies that produce a product or a service that could be sold or traded internationally, exporting, that's what we're talking about there. And FDI is foreign direct investment. And we do as a state identify from an economic development agency standpoint what we call some key or target industries. And it's not to suggest that other industries aren't critical to the state or to communities in which they're established, but so that we as an agency have a little more focus on where do we think we can play and where do we see an opportunity that represents a potential future investment, growth, and shared prosperity for the state. So I wanted to share those, that glossary. So I'll just jump right through here and cut to the chase to say we administer about 90 programs as an agency. That ebbs and flows a little bit with each legislative session as some programs sunset, others are extended through legislative action, and still other programs get stood up. And so we gladly take those on, like a state agency would, right? When the legislature says it's a priority to invest, we'll jump on that. We think it's probably a compliment that they trust us to do so. But our programs are constantly sort of ebbing and flowing a little bit as funding comes in around and programs reach maturity. And some of those are federal programs as well that come down. Jennifer mentioned Daniel Holbrook from the broadband office when he presented with this group previously. That's an example of funding that's coming down through the federal government and being administered through the state. So, go ahead. Effectively, again, you'll all have access to this, so given the time constraints, I'll just jump in and say, really our work is divided into two primary avenues, or at least that's how I'll define it here. One of them is about business development, the other is community development. With business development, we focus really on, with our community partners, local economic development and others, access to capital, access to markets for export and sales support for Oregon businesses, and access to expertise. So we try to help convene those things, capital, expertise, and global markets in support of Oregon business. On the infrastructure side, so we've got business development, community development. On the infrastructure side of things, that's really our community development focus to a great extent. And if you were to look at our agency budget, far and away, the lion's share of our budget is infrastructure financing to help support public infrastructure in particular to allow business and economic activity to go on. So we help support tribal sovereign governmental entities, cities, counties, special districts, as they have infrastructure needs. We have programs to help support the funding for those. Limited incentives available as well. Skip referenced the Strategic Reserve Fund. The EZ that you saw, there was enterprise zones. That's established in state law. It's a tax-related incentive that is administered locally, but established through the state. All right, I wanted to include a couple of slides just quickly, and then I'll cut to the chase with the study and kind of where we're at and the kind of questions we have. Our recruitment team, as we're looking at potential expansion of Oregon businesses and foreign direct investment in particular, we don't shy away from the attributes Oregon brings to the table. And it's a very competitive atmosphere, it's a competitive environment globally, but certainly among our, I'll say competitive set, that'll be the last time I say competitive for at least 10 seconds probably. We're proud of the workforce, the education levels, the attainment that we have available, and it really ties neatly to the work of this group and others. While workforce development isn't really the center of the bullseye, if you will, from an economic development agency standpoint, it's critical for Oregon's economy that we have a workforce that is trained and ready and available. And so our agency takes both pride in where we are thus far as a state, but also in importance is recognized around how we continue to develop workforce. And a little bit more about the place here, just so you know. We talk about Oregon from an economic development standpoint in a number of ways, and one of them that's important is our position geographically. We think it's a strength that Oregon brings, that we're positioned here on the Pacific Rim from a comparative analysis between Washington and Oregon, fairly affordable place relative to those two states. When we compare Oregon's affordability to do business, to live, to work, etc., a little different story sometimes as you look at other regions of the country. And so we as a state are focused on how do we help promote Oregon, the attributes we have that don't shy away from the challenges that exist, but really do try to showcase the most important and valuable assets we bring. And some of that is just the place itself. From a talent and a quality of life standpoint, we certainly don't lead with that, but we want to make sure we share that information as well. Great. And so I just wanted to share a listing of what are identified as our target industries currently for the agency. And again, so much of the discussion thus far today has really resonated with me as I think about the employment department and economists trying to define high technology. What does that mean? Or advanced manufacturing, I'm certain is one that groups grapple with as well. What do you mean when you say advanced manufacturing? For us, it most often shows up as metals and machinery manufacturing. But you can see we've got outdoor gear and apparel, food and beverage, bioscience or life science, forestry and wood products, of course, critical legacy industry for Oregon. And clean tech, about a year ago, we identified as an industry we needed to focus on a little more closely. And so in doing so, I raised my hand and said, I'll be happy to be the point person. I'm the Portland Metro Regional Development Officer. So there's a good concentration of clean tech and interested related businesses here. And I said I'd be happy to lead that effort on behalf of the RDOs, but immediately recognized there are a ton of questions and things we don't know. So if you would jump to the next one. One of the things we needed to do is determine what do we mean when we say clean tech? Is that different than climate tech? Are they synonymous? We need to look at clean technology through an economic development lens. So again, the study we're engaged in is not one that's about workforce specifically. It's not about energy, but you really can't talk about clean technology without talking about energy. And we can't talk about any industry without talking about workforce. So our study is not a workforce or energy study, but certainly have been points of analysis and discussion. Our process was one in which we had an open and competitive RFP that went out. We partnered with and selected Eco Northwest to conduct the study from a technical consultant standpoint, and we're continuing to work with them. The time frame for our clean tech economic development study to be completed, we have a technical advisory group meeting, that's the tag you see up there, this week. And I expect at the end of the month we'll have a final draft report that will get circulated with both agency leadership and to the governor's office. And then I would expect mid-September, maybe early September, we'll have our final study published and ready for public consumption that way. I just want to frame up with those scoping challenges, some of the issues we've had to sort of grapple with. And again, this is really a presentation about questions more than answers, I suppose. But what do we do in these various instances? What about businesses that are actively and really aggressively pursuing the greening of their business or building in sustainability related aspects? I saw Daimler mentioned on the slide previously. If you think about alternative fuels, whether it's electrification or hydrogen or otherwise, you know, if you're looking at freight or passenger vehicle, alternative fuels and mobility certainly are part of the clean technology ecosystem. What about electrified school buses or electric charter buses? So as we were thinking about how do we capture what the universe is and the ecosystem, if we want to look at the economic opportunities, part of what Eco Northwest needed to do, and we asked them to do, is to look at various sectors and subsectors, but there's not a clean definition where we could point to NAICS codes or point to occupation codes and say, oh, okay, these are all clean tech jobs and clean tech industries. Because it's fairly disparate, there are industry members that are working in clean tech as a department or a division within their company, but their NAICS code might show them as a freight company or a manufacturing company of some other sort. So that's been part of the challenge we've been grappling with. In terms of inputs, forestry and wood products, how do we get mass timber out of that? How do we understand that? If we think about natural resources like water, is that an ag play or is that circular economy? Is that about circularity and renewables? And so we've really grappled with so many of those questions. The last one I've got there is semiconductor. You know, such a critical industry here in Oregon and globally. How do we make sense of that as it relates to an agency economic development opportunities study? If we include the workforce and the outputs, the economic impacts of semiconductor, we run the risk of massively overstating the clean tech piece. It could be overrepresented. If we don't include them, it seems like a real miss because it's so ubiquitous. Semiconductor is in everything we do. And so our report will make mention of semi, and we'll talk about the importance of it to clean technology, but we made a decision not to incorporate the employment numbers and some of the economic output, the gross product and sales from semi in Oregon Clean Tech. Those are the kinds of decisions and discussions that frankly we've been having and are still ongoing to some extent. There we go. So we did land on a definition for clean tech. What do we mean as an economic development agency when we say clean tech for us? You can read it there, but it really comes down to technologies that are deployed to mitigate, reduce, or eliminate altogether environmental impacts. So it's pretty broad in definition if you read through that rather than my reading through it. You can see we're talking about decarbonization, how we utilize natural resources and materials, conserving and minimizing and reusing waste. So pretty broad in definition that way. Part of the challenge we have, again, sort of a presentation on questions here, is given that, we believe that's what clean tech is for Oregon from an economic development standpoint. Where are we going to place our bets? Does that mean that we should take a little bit of resource and spread it like peanut butter across the state? Should we narrow it down and focus in more closely on specific subsectors? And that's the direction that we're looking to go with it. We want to try to identify some of Oregon's strongest and best opportunities in clean tech. It doesn't mean, again, that some industries are less important than others, but it does mean we've got to try to get a little more focused with our efforts. So we did look at some of Oregon's comparative advantages. Again, we have experience with renewables, renewable energy. You can see how we define those comparative advantages up at the top of the slide there. We looked at the fact that Oregon has already policies that are generally supportive of renewables. And it's not a scary new thing. It doesn't mean we're turning everything upside down here in Oregon. We've got a policy environment which is already supportive in many ways. The skilled workforce we've spoken of, the R&D strength, I will tell you, it's a miss that I didn't put private industry there. So you can see, we know that there's strength from universities and research institutions. There is a boatload, to clip myself there a little bit, of critical R&D that is changing the world that's happening right here in the Northwest and happening here in Oregon. And from our standpoint, we want to be and need to continue to focus on R&D as a critical aspect of business development here in Oregon as well. So our location, again, I'll point to that. And if you want to jump to the next, that's a comparative look. You'll see there's a natural alignment. When we think about where we're competitive, very much aligned with that comparative look. Where we see we have a comparative advantage, we think we also have a competitive strength, and so that's a natural fit. But again, our position globally from an export potential standpoint, we think is a competitive advantage over some other states. And again, the talent pipeline, the commitment that we already have to clean technology gives us some good tailwinds. Thank you. There are some disadvantages, some challenges that we've looked at and have been working through. I've got us listed here after saying that we're a relatively affordable place to do business compared to California and Washington. Again, not the most affordable place for your staff or for your team in terms of housing costs in some parts. And so that's a challenge. Not always considered a business-friendly state. So those are challenges that we have as a state. There is massive, significant, I'll put here, global competition in this space. It's not just with other states. Skip mentioned some of what we capture as interventions that other states are taking. Globally, we're competing as well for some of these clean tech opportunities. So again, heightens for us the need to really try to drill down. Where's the highest and best use of these public dollars? Where can we have the biggest impact? And where should we invest? And I guess if you want to jump to the next slide there. What we're doing with regard to trying to identify and drill down further into subsets of potential industries or subsectors that are going to be highest priority or represent best opportunity for Oregon, we've got a series of questions we've been answering. And these went from tiers, which felt like it was a little exclusive, I suppose, to now categories of industry. And the reality is, category 1 would be those that we think Oregon has a current strength. And so if the intent is to play to our strengths and to build on those would be captured or answered by the questions that we have identified in that category 1. Then you can see the other categories. If we think about emerging strengths for the state or emerging opportunities and potential strengths, or maybe a little further out around the curve of the earth, opportunities for Oregon. And all of this is going to be subject to, in many cases, policy decisions that are going to be made. That our agency will work within that policy environment as we determine what we think the best and highest use of those public dollars are, where the best return on investment lies. It, in many cases, will take policy action to be able to unlock and to move forward on those in a meaningful way. All right, this is the obligatory eye chart, I suppose, but really harkening back to Skip's comments about the competitive nature of the national landscape, we're seeing tax incentives, innovation, grant and other funding, technical assistance funding that states are aggressively pursuing that we're competing with as a state. And so part of our analysis has been, and with the help of Eco Northwest, to take a look at the incentives and the interventions other states are taking, so we can see where do we line up, where do we have opportunity to make improvements. And I will share that a big part of our effort has been trying to work in collaboration alignment with the governor's Clean Tech Task Force, the group that Skip and Brooke just reported on those subcommittees. You'll see alignment here. That's not accidental. We're looking at the same data sets in many cases, and that dialogue back and forth has been an important part of the learning. So as we think about the different inputs for our study, we're taking cues from industry input, from the Clean Tech Task Force, and others as well. I guess the next slide we've already seen, it's part of the other presentation, that is the gap that exists. Oregon not being on the map, I think, Skip was how you mentioned it, that we're not on the map. There's a significant opportunity, might be another way to position that, but we're behind the curve on this. And as a state, we've made significant investments in semiconductor most recently. This is going to be my editorial comment. I think we need to continue to invest in semi, and I think we need to continue to invest in other industry sectors, and clean tech being one of them, that can help drive the state's economy and help us be more competitive. That's the end of my editorial comment, I think. We'll see. So with that, I guess I'd just say that, just as evidenced by the presentation Skip and Brooke provided about the work that's being done by the Clean Tech Task Force, PGE's Clean Energy Workforce Coalition, I had to write it down, Brooke, so I got the name right, has been underway for a couple of years as well. There's also Work Systems, has been doing a ton of work and really detailed, deeper dives into the Portland Clean Energy Fund program, looking at the potential opportunities for workforce development, the demand, and the wages, and the skills that are going to be needed to help support the clean energy transition that's on its way and that we've established as a state. So there's momentum that's happening on several fronts, and I think the opportunity to align that, to share data, and to learn from one another, to build on that is critical. But more than that, it's going to take some policy action, it's going to take political will, and it's going to take Oregon embracing, I've forgotten how it was characterized in the slide there, but being welcoming to economic development. I think Oregon really needs to take a growth mindset. I think I lied about my editorial comment, so but I really feel like as a state, we've got to decide. Let me put it that way. Are we going to have a growth mindset? And that's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it is making some decisions about, is it time to advance and grow in some very intentional ways? And if so, where, in what way, and to what extent? And those are decisions that are those policy decisions. So a bit scattershot there, but I tried to run through that quickly. So thanks for the opportunity.
That's great, thanks, Jeff. You maybe hang on to the microphone in case anyone has questions about the presentation, but I do want to just draw some important connections to the work that you all are doing, in that when the industry consortia were conceived and in statute, it really does point to the opportunities to align the state's workforce development strategy and economic development strategy. And in the tech space, it's fairly broad, and as we heard from Jeff and as we've heard from Amy previously, it's a bit undefined, or it's defined but it's evolving. It's not clean. You can't say, like, these are the NAICS codes that apply to technology and therefore this is the sandbox we work in. And Jeff, I really appreciate your point that while workforce development maybe doesn't drive economic development, we also can't think about economic development without considering workforce development. And I think those are some of the things that this group can be thinking about, is sort of where is that intersection? Where do you all add unique value in building the workforce and talent development in the high-tech sector? So are there any questions for Jeff or Skip or Brooke? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not sure who, and this is just a general question, but how large is the clean tech industry in Oregon, and how does that kind of rank with the other target areas?
You know, I'm afraid I don't have a direct answer on that one. I certainly can go back to the question, but how we rank comparatively to other states, we're very competitive in that way. Part of that's because of our long history of renewables, but again, it comes down to how do you define clean tech? What do you incorporate or include within that? And so that moves the needle quite a bit one way or another, depending on what you include or incorporate within that. So there's a lot of research investment in the research triangle, for example, in the Carolinas. A lot of money being put into Detroit and the Midwest around EV battery work, and thinking about how some of those legacy industries in that part of the country are embracing and building out on electric vehicles and electrification. The Southeast continues to move forward and make great strides that way as well. We have a long history here, and that's why I wanted to point to our policy and regulatory environment, our sort of public and private adoption and acceptance of clean tech and clean energy. That kind of environmental focus is part of our ethos here. So I think that helps move us forward, but it's not sufficient to drive business investment. we have to continue to move forward that way. And so I think we're very competitive in the current scheme of things. But as the slide that shows the investments that you see nationally, energy investments and manufacturing investments on the right, Oregon's not on the map relative to those. So we've got work to do to not just continue to lead, but to stay up and keep pace with.
Jeff, is it reasonable to assume that the economic development study, when published, will provide a bit of a definition and relative size of clean tech to other sectors in Oregon?
Yes, and again, those two are tied together. So the definition I've provided here in this deck is our definition for the study. And I'll caveat it's still in draft form, but we're pretty far down the road here. So I'd say that's our definition. So it will capture and try to quantify the economic inputs and the value from a direct and indirect standpoint as we define it through that economic development lens. It may be a little different than how the workforce board or others might define the economic impacts based on what they're looking at. So ours is primarily focused on trade and sector, but there's so much work that will be done and so much activity that will take place necessarily through non-traded sector work. If you think about, well, we could just think of one company in Washington County. There are folks that work in HVAC and electrical and other skilled trades that have worked a career working with one business there. And we'll see that replicated as Oregon continues to expand and grow on clean tech, certainly clean energy transition. I didn't talk about offshore wind. That's a huge opportunity as well.
I was going to say that another thing to think about too is the recently released innovation index. So that also shows in Oregon, how we're trending relative to other states across a number of metrics. Everything from R&D, commercialization, talent, entrepreneurship, and the report described Oregon is a jack of all trades, a master of none, in terms of we show up okay across most of those, and some are somewhat strong. But the problem is, if you look at the last 5 years, we're declining across almost every major metric. And trending in the bottom 20% of states, with a dramatic reversal of fortune, and some that are really important to us, like entrepreneurship and R&D. If you look at the recommendations coming out of the Climate Tech Task Force, a lot of the recommendations seek to not only address the bleeding, as it were, with those, but also to advance beyond. And so it's more of a recommendation of expand what we have currently to be back at the table, and then additive recommendations on top of that hopefully put us in the vanguard of states like Massachusetts and some of the others that Jeff just flagged here. If you were to look at the states that are leading on other innovation index metrics, it's going to be very similar to some of the states that were flagged in the study that Eco Northwest is doing, just in climate tech that Jeff alluded to.
Jeff, thank you for your talk, and I was curious to know how much research and investment is going into the latest generation nuclear technology, and just because there is such a huge demand of energy from data centers that solar and wind alone won't be able to cope, and it requires, from my understanding, a lot of regulatory changes. And how are we coping? And apologies, I skipped your presentation. I have no feet to reach. Just curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I'll share my thoughts, and of course, I suspect PG probably has some thoughts about nuclear and the place of it, along with maybe wind and solar and wave energy as well. So we've been looking at a number of different technologies. I think what I'll say is this: we have a demand. We need more energy than we currently are transmitting, able to provide. And when conversations about offloading offshore wind, for example, which is a very heated conversation here, if you're not aware, When conversations about floating offshore wind come up, we as an agency take a position to say, we're not in the energy business nor transmission, but there's a supply chain opportunity that exists. And so I'll often think about California as the customer. California has embraced offshore wind and has garnered some significant investments in offshore wind. Those are long investments. It's got a long tail. Those are 10 or 15 years before they're built out. So we're not talking about whether or not Oregon should or shouldn't embrace floating offshore wind, but we're very interested in how do we ensure there's a supply chain and a ready workforce to support that, upskilling and otherwise, to help support those industry transitions that are taking place. That's kind of a non-answer, I know, but we aren't really taking a position per se on nuclear. That will be a policy decision that I suspect is, you mentioned political will. I think that's going to be a one to grapple with, to be sure. But what we see from a recruitment standpoint, the businesses that are looking to invest in Oregon, and the expansions that are taking place, data center and other. There's a significant call for energy and water. There's a lot of water, demand for water. And so as a state, I take the mindset we have to be additive in our thinking. How do we expand our energy mix rather than have the discussion? We don't engage in the discussion about whether one's better than another, of course, but how do we build the supply to meet the demand?
But are we seeing research and investment in the latest generation nuclear technology in Oregon? Or is that conversation happening at the Clean Tech Task Force, for example? Anywhere?
Yeah, I was going to say that conversations definitely come up, especially around things like new scale energy and sort of modularized nuclear reactors, and the energy storage conversation and transmission issues all are kind of related, right? Because how can you create and support modularized sort of point of production distributed energy type of approaches? And there's no one size fits all any of this. I mean, it's a yes and to everything, essentially. To your point, the demand is only increasing, and we need to explore a lot of options.
I would just add the innovation piece is critical for the energy sector. The yes and is absolutely true, but also to get to 2040 decarbonization targets, we have to have innovation in the sector. So continuing to support, clean energy innovation is going to be critical in decarbonizing the electric sector. And nuclear in particular will take a constitutional amendment in order for it to be built to its market again.
Okay, super. Well, we're gonna amend our agenda. I haven't consulted, but agreement. Let's take a 5-minute break, personal needs, and then we're gonna jump right into our presentation with Cherry, and then we'll wrap with a full discussion, bringing in all of the pieces that we've heard. So, 5-minute break. Go ahead and come back. Let's say 8-minute break. Come back at 2:40.
Earlier I said to you guys that I work at the Willamette Education Service District, and for 2 years I've been working on 4 projects for the Oregon Department of Education. My real passion is I am like customer service central. Like anytime someone calls me and goes, wouldn't it be great if we had? And I'd be like, oh, I think I could do that. And so anyway, I kind of overworked, so I'm going on vacation after this. Because it is a personal problem, right? I always tell people when you start complaining about overworking, you have to just look in the mirror, because usually it's your own problem that you do those kinds of things. So one of my great loves over the past few years is Oregon employability skills, and I'm going to be talking about that today, but I want to give you a little run-in of where we kind of came from. And I'm going to move fast, so you're going to have to move the slides pretty fast, because I can talk fast, and I'm going to, because I think this time of the afternoon it helps us if we can just kind of rock and roll it. So I'm going to go into the challenge, the timeline, the deliverables, who's our partners, who's doing this work, and what are our outcomes and what are our next steps. And so go to the next slide. How many of you have heard this 1,000 times? Industry partners consistently noting that students come into the workforce lacking essential employability skills which are critical to success on the job. I heard someone lamenting one day years ago, maybe about 8 years ago, about, I don't have time to teach this when they come here. I need them to have it when they show up. Deb Mumhill over here talked a little bit about educator externships that have been happening around the state in the summer. And it was in that experience where I partnered with Associated General Contractors in about 2016, I think it was. And we said, let's do an educator externship. Let's get teachers out for 8 days in the summer to go all over and be with these companies. Well, I learned as much or more than they did, because everywhere we went, they said the same thing. I could teach them how to weld, but if I can't teach them to be flexible and adaptable and to be able to think critically, communicate with safety in mind and things like that, it's really tough. So we believe that there was a significant economic impact affecting both companies and individual Oregonians, our students coming up to the future workforce, because of this challenge. So in the next slide. So as I said there, in the 1980, well, okay, so let me back up. In the educator externship, when we started that, we made it a college course where our teachers could get college credit for it. So I started researching, and I'm like, gee, the 1980s, the 90s, all in there, people are talking about 21st century skills. And so we decided to embed that in 2017 and 18 in our education externships. Then I found the data out there from JP Morgan Chase Skills Panel Report saying that they spent $350 million to look across the nation to see what the skills were, and guess what they did? All they did was confirm what we knew in 1980 and 1990. And I hate to say this because I know I'm old, I don't like to think that way, but the 80s is a long time ago. Right? It is, it's a long time ago. So in 2021, I was really blessed because the Workforce and Talent Development Board said, hey, we like this idea. We want to endorse this, start steering it along a little bit. They gave me 2 co-chairs to help with that work. And then Oregon Department of Education came in and said, hey, we're going to give you some money, and we want to fund this specifically at the middle school level. I give them lots of teasers, though, and I actually got funding to do more. I got to take it all the way down to 1st grade, and then got to take it up even into an e-learning online version that'll be out in about 3 weeks. So next slide. Okay, what are these skills? These are the 21st century skills. And I know sometimes we're still arguing over, like, well, what skills, should be on the list. Let's do another, survey. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and say, wouldn't it be great if we could just start with this foundation and then we could build from there? And if we find things that aren't working well, we can talk about it. But I'm personally tired of talking about what are those skills we want to teach. And so I just said, let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's start with this as a great foundation. It's not the end-all, be-all. There are other programs here in Oregon that do tremendous work with people who've been through trauma and all kinds of other things. I would say that's building a room on the house, and we have some folks that need you to help build a room on the house for them. And so let's do it all and not worry about being competitive. And then with the funding from ODE, this is all free and open resource. So that's what's really cool too. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, I'm not going to be able to play this video for you, but in a second I'm going to show you where it's at. But you can see that this is Charlie Hopewell, that some of you probably know in this room. And this particular video is some of our industry partners, some of the early people that came in and sat at the table with us and said, let's do something about this. It includes educators and industry partners talking about this work. When we got the curriculum up and out there, I was blown away. Completely blown away. We have right now about 100 school districts that have been trained, and no, I don't have time to develop the curriculum and know exactly what they're doing. I don't. Okay, so I can't tell you exactly what everybody's doing right now. I'd like to get to that level. I think we need to get there someday, but right now with just creating the curriculum. Community colleges are using it. A lot of their grant run programs, some of the Future Ready grants and so forth are using it. Oregon Bioscience just did a training about 2 weeks ago in their apprenticeship program. Voc Rehab, met with them many, many times. Several of our chambers, nonprofits, apprenticeship programs around the state are saying, hey, we need to have this conversation. We need well-rounded people. And so we're going to start embedding it. Oregon After School programs that work with our kids. OSU Outdoor School decided to do communication and collaboration while the kids are out doing outdoor school. They're focusing on those two skills. Kroc Center's just been doing a really great job with some of the Team Oregon Build students, and they use it actually for onboarding in their organization as well as for teaching it in some of the programs that they're doing. Business and industry, because I mentioned, and you can go to the next slide, that we are going to have an e-learning version in a couple weeks. It can be used for onboarding. It can be used for skilling up, current employees as well as the future workforce. So what if all employees had this foundation? What if you could skill up your current employees? And what if industry and education had a common language? So that when people are coming up and they're starting to work and all of a sudden you start talking about collaboration and they know what you're talking about. So, and then what if it was free? And I just told you it is free, so let's just keep going to the next slide. So Oregon Employability Skills is free. It can be used to skill up the current workforce, and it can be used for onboarding, and it can be used to engage the future workforce. How many of you have folks that you have sent out to schools, and or maybe you've been there yourself and you're going to tell them about your job, and one kid maybe cares and the rest of them are like, and the teacher is going, I've got to check that off, and I did that, done that, And so what we find is that if people go in and talk about not only their job, but this is how we use adaptability at Intel. Intel is in one of our videos. This is how we use communication in the construction industry. This is how we use collaboration in healthcare. When they start talking about those things, students are able to identify what they're talking about and what they need to have in terms of skills. Let's go to the next page. So I wish I could play these two for you, but in a second, again, I told you I'll tell you where they're at. So Stephanie Cox is on the left-hand side. She's a healthcare teacher. She's a super teacher. Even surprised she needed any help at all from me with Oregon Employability Skills, because she's always really, really tried to embed this in her with her classroom. But this last year, her kids were working with the fire department, and the fire department guy called her and said, Stephanie, I don't know what you're doing with your students. They've always been great, don't get me wrong, but this year there's something different. And she called me and she said, Sherry, the only thing I did different is I systematically taught employability skills, and I made sure they got it. Okay, over on the right is a young man, and there's actually 5 students in that talk about employability skills out at iBuild in Salem. If you ever get a chance to head over there. In fact, I think they have a thing Wednesday, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I have an opening. So if you're interested, Todd will get you connected, 'cause I'll be on vacation. And these students, when they talk, I walked in with our videographer and I said this, can I get a few of you to come over here and talk about employability skills? I had 5 kids line up immediately. I didn't give them any more prompting than that. And they got up and they talked about communication. A little gal talks about, she's the project manager for her team, and she said, I don't really know how to tell people what to do. I kind of just take orders, and I found myself being the project manager, and I had to really think about how I was going to communicate in a way that wasn't really rude, but also was going to be effective, and that we were going to get our job done. And when you can hear a student talking about that and understanding that that's that important, it was so exciting. This young man right here talked about resilience, and he said, we cut boards wrong, and he says, every time we do something wrong, we all want to go home and just not come back. And he goes, but we keep coming back, and we're going to get this job done on time. And he related it all to having learned about resilience and being able to stay in there. Our next slide. So where are we at right now? Well, in 3 short weeks, we will have all the curriculum. We will have all the curriculum on steroids, okay? We have 7 languages. We have avatars in our middle school curriculum and our elementary curriculum. Why is that important? Because sometimes, if you've ever met a middle schooler, sometimes they just stare at you. Like, I don't know what you're saying. And you don't know if they're just looking like that because they don't want to answer, or they really don't know what you're saying, right? So the avatar is usually the first one in the class to answer a question. And then they go, oh, yeah, I got a story like that. And then they want to give their story. Our pilot project that came back on that told us that teachers said we couldn't get them to be quiet. They were so proud of their skills because actually they realized that they worked. Because we teach them that if you're going to help mom with dinner on Thursday night, you just worked. And guess what? Everything you come and turn in here in the classroom, you just worked. Turns out they're actually really proud of themselves for that. So the teachers are like, man, my kids are sitting up, they're excited, they're connecting, and now when I want to talk to them about careers in the future, they're interested in talking about it. When just, 10 minutes before that, before they started thinking about employability skills, they didn't care. They're like, I don't work, so don't talk to me about that right now. Maybe you can talk to me about it in a few years, maybe. So what we need now is to hear voices from this room and from industry, letting us know why is this important. We need them to stay at the table and stay engaged. This started with industry. We need them to stay engaged and to help us move into that engagement phase where we can really test it. We have wonderful anecdotal information from teachers and so forth that have been doing this. But we need to move a little bit more critically into understanding the value of this in terms of that economic mobility for that individual student and for our companies at large. So in the packet, I'm not going to go through the packet because y'all can read, okay? But that's going to give you information on how to get back to me. It's going to give you a sample of things that we have. We have a document where industry can get back to us and let us know how the future workforce is doing based on these skills. And then I also have to tell you, there's one humble point in there. One of our documents didn't get printed correctly, and I was like, all right, well, the answer funds go away in September, so I have to live with this document that's not exactly perfect, and so that's okay. There's a document in there on how to engage high schoolers and middle schoolers. That's basically, what's in there, and you can look at it for yourself. Let's just go to the next page real quick. There you go. I made it through. And so all you've got to do is go, and in fact, if you don't mind doing it real quick on your computer, if you have it, go to OregonEmployabilitySkills.org. If you find it for like a second, I'll applaud you and we'll be done, because I just want to make sure everybody knows how to get there and how to find that, because again, it's free and open resource. There is no you don't need money to participate, whether you're going to share this with a nonprofit, a chamber, a workforce, work source. There is no money for them to need to do this. Now, there's a little more to it, but that's going to be for another day. I just wanted to give you a high level. We have badges. We have all kinds of other things. So if you are interested in knowing more, let me know. But on that website, when you go to users and curriculum, you go straight down below it. You're almost there. It will give you video links. And if you go to those video links, you'll see those videos that were there that you didn't get to see, and or you can pull them from the PowerPoint later. So I hope I've given you some awareness and some action steps to help us keep this project going, because we're seeing some phenomenal results. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. My name is Todd Mell. I'm the director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. I see many familiar faces here, obviously, and some of you are on the board. The reason that Jennifer and I thought it would be a good idea to bring this topic to you today was, it sort of links back to what you said earlier, Deb, and then your good idea in thinking, Kyle. Because in so many ways this applies to pretty much all sectors, right? If you look at, and it's been a priority of the Workforce and Talent Development Board for, I'd say, at least a decade. So Sherry's done some amazing work and has led the efforts around Oregon employability skills. Unfortunately, in the not too distant future, she's going to be rolling off. And so some of us on the State Workforce Board and others are trying to figure out, since this is a critical skills space where there's oftentimes critical gaps in the workforce, as witnessed by study after study after study, we think and feel like we've got to figure out a way to sustain this work over time. So there's some opportunities for some of you in the room who are already on the WTDB and other partners to learn more about this and help us together work to sustain these efforts over time. So, as Sherry said, if you have any time this Wednesday, there's going to be a site visit down in Salem, which is a sort of highlight of a partnership between Team Oregon Builds, and that's a group that's working in different spots around the state, building tiny homes and sheds for homeless, houseless folks, and those that are still trying to find housing after the wildfires of 2020. And they're in partnership with the Kroc Center, the McDonald's folks down in Salem, and are doing a summer program for about 24 kids. So not only are they learning how to build tiny homes and what a stud is and what a header is and how to put a window in and what a door is, and developing skills in the construction sector, but they're also getting exposure and training in employability skills. So sort of to your earlier point, Sherry, I visited a couple of weeks ago. These kids come up and they come from a multitude of backgrounds, right? And walk right up to you and a couple of them said, "Hey, what's your name? Why are you here today?" Shook my hand and said, "I never used to be able to do this 2 weeks ago, Todd. But now I can talk to you and ask questions, and we're learning about adaptability, communication, entrepreneurial mindset." It was amazing. So there's going to be a lot of passionate folks there. There's going to be people from the governor's office there. The director of Oregon Housing and Community Services is going to attend. Our agency director, Ben Cannon, will be there. So I think it's a great opportunity to not only see a pocket of what might help us be able to sustain this employability skills effort over the long run, but I think it would also be, if you can make it, very inspiring, and we'd appreciate your engagement and good thinking there. So I also think the employability skills, to Kyle's good comment earlier, provides a topic for all of the consortia to come together around in conjunction with the Workforce and Talent Development Board to figure out what we can do to move that work forward in the future. And then I guess one other thing, and then I'll stop. September 13th is our next quarterly WTDB meeting. We're going to have it down at Knife Rivers Training Center in Albany. And we'll have about an hour-long space for a discussion around, hey, when we find these topics and areas that are a priority for the State Workforce Board, Education Workforce Circles, for the Consortia. So what's the process? What's the map? What sort of protocol can we follow so that we can sort of shorten time to market, if you will? Because Venkat knows this better than any. I mean, we've been talking about essential employability skills, or as you refer to them as human skills, for years. But what do we really have to show for it in terms of return on investment and successes? So all that will sort of come into that conversation on September 13th from 1 to 4 down in Albany at Knife River. So thank you so much for letting us come and chat a little bit about some of our work. Really appreciate it.
I think, Melissa, I saw your hand. Do you have a question before you?
I was just wondering if you said it was free, but I was curious if it had specific licensing terms. Is it only allowed to be used in Oregon?
Well, it could be used anywhere anybody wanted to use it. However, what you need to know is that in the high school adult version, they're going to learn everything they learn through the eyes of an Oregon company. So there's 10 skills, 4 traits, so 40 times the student is going to encounter a company in Oregon, do an activity related to what the skill is from that company. And so, sure, they can do those if they want. Maybe they just want to move here after that. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but we do it through the eyes of Oregon companies. All of the material. One highlight of it is we make the students learn to tell their story, which is interviewing. Right. Tell me the story when you ever had to analyze something. Tell me the story when you had to communicate or collaborate. Those are the things that they're learning to do each and every time. So 40 times they got to tell their story.
Yeah.
Sherry, so first of all, that was great, and I'm hoping you're doing this for the other consortia.
Whatever Todd puts on my schedule, I show up.
Because I sort
Yeah.
of sit on the bridge between healthcare and tech, and I know
Yeah.
healthcare would love this.
Yes.
Yeah.
But my question is there any kind of certification that goes with this, that when the students complete it,
Yes.
they have a document, they can put it
Yes.
on their resume or whatever?
Yeah, so we have learner badges. Don't worry too much about those. Those are for the student to gauge their own learning. But we have an academic badge, and it must be graded by a person who's going to look at their story as well as the other parts of the assessment. In order to get an academic badge, we protect it. Now, when I say we protect it, we do allow community-based organizations to give the badge. We just go over it with them and say, look, you can't let this out in the public. You got to know who's taking the assessment when they're taking it. That badge is done through Badger. They can then put that on their resume or their LinkedIn, which they're going to learn how to do LinkedIn and digital literacy. So, yeah. Any other questions? Deb.
I just want you, I've seen this. It's beautiful what Sherry has created and her team, the notebook. It is so engaging for a K-12 student to just can't wait to get in. So if you probably haven't seen what it looks like on the backside, but it is really beautifully done. While you have this group, what I was going to say, if you still need, when we think of tech, when you look at these skills, what are the top two in tech? Are they digital literacy and entrepreneurial mindset? Do you need more videos? Do you need this group to engage, to give you some, we want to make sure tech is in your
thank you.
portfolio?
Yeah.
So I would just throw it out.
Yeah, so one of the things that some of you, if you were at the Talent Summit, you heard there was an individual that got up and said, hey, we really need industry to be at the table and to help us. This was teachers. They're saying we need to bring stuff into the classroom. And so while we have our basic videos in there right now, we are looking for more and more resources. Companies a lot of times will make a video because they see a need, but then they don't know, what do I do with it? How do I get it out so that young people can see that video? So this is also that place where we can put those resources, and then teachers can pick and choose. Our goal was to make sure that no teacher was staying up in the middle of the night trying to figure out something to teach in their class to help them with collaboration. So we give them everything that they need to do it. And I don't even want to go into our crosswalk. It is just like, it'll blow your mind because it's AVID, science, STEM, it's all CTE programs, everything. It's crazy. But that's what we wanted to do, is just make sure everybody had what they needed. But if they're teaching all like healthcare and they want to move in some videos in and out, teachers get the idea pretty quickly about what they need to do. I will say, though, it took me 4 years to get industry partners to figure out what I needed them to do. But as soon as I had a couple of examples, then they were like, oh, okay, now I got it, Sherry. And then they were very rapidly helping us with this process, which I love because bringing industry and education together is really, really helpful. I'll stop with this. I did go to the International Society of Technology and Education this summer, 20,000 strong in Denver, and you know what they were all talking about? Two things: AI, and we've got to start talking about employability skills. Because if we don't, information's too readily available. We've got to have people that are versatile, that have these skills. And I was so proud because I had one of my writers with me, and we were like, I think we might be on the top of this one. So it was really, really cool to be there and be able to think that through with a group of other people from around the nation.
Great. I think, Jeff, you had a question?
Well, it's probably a separate maybe conversation when you're back from vacation, but mine really had to do with that industry engagement piece of it. You've got a couple of people identified on your website to contact, and you've got the industry packet and that kind of thing, but that's sort of what my question is, and maybe it's a separate sidebar.
Jeff? You can reach me at OregonEmployabilitySkills@WEAST.org, and I will be back on Monday and we can connect. I would love that. Yeah, Tom or Charlie, any of us. Yeah, you want to hit them up sooner, that'd be great. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep talking too much. Rad Lab, who was Rad? I can't even think of the person I met with Friday, or
Oh,
Thursday of
yeah,
last week, Cynthia.
well, you met with
Um,
Cynthia and Shelley Ritter.
So there's some really things that have been started. So bioscience in Oregon spent $150,000 with this kind of avatar learning. And so Rad Lab is bioscience, and it basically takes you from the research, the innovation, the invention. There's this little avatar that moves, that you build your own avatar to look just like you in a lab coat, all the way from research to innovation to production. So then you're all of a sudden in this production facility, and then you switch hats and you're all the way to logistics and transportation. So what bioscience did was helping students understand not just being a researcher in a microscope if you're in bioscience, but the entire production to get it out from innovation and conception to product. They also have that built for healthcare. But what it's free. I can share it with this group, the Rad Lab. They want to look at bioscience. I'm asking for healthcare next so that students can see all the different pathways into finance and public communication and the healthcare, specialties that we all think of. So there could be some opportunities for them, like if we could really define tech, what are the pathways into tech? We're still unknown, we're still confusing to kids, especially our first generation Oregonians don't understand what the world of tech means, even though they have high aptitudes for it. So there's some really cool platforms that we can plug and play into these that go a little bit deeper into that actual career exploration in a sector, an industry sector that they want to explore, because you've already got them captured with the teachers doing this and getting these platforms in front of them.
Yeah, and then they can just jump right off from that. So anytime when they contacted me about the Rad Labs, I was like, great, let's put it in here so teachers can find it. And so that's what we're doing too, is we have companies that want to do projects with kids in school. And we're like, great, let's put it in here, because this is where teachers are going to find it. They're not going to have to go all over to try to figure out where this stuff is. So it's been really great to have that central hub for that reason.
I have this.
You have that,
I have this
okay.
one, yeah. All right.
Good job.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think I mentioned at the beginning, Todd and I and the Industry Consortia team are really looking for ways to better integrate your sector-specific focus with these sort of broader workforce and talent development strategies, priorities, and how we can build on that iterative informing. So I think we pivoted our agenda a little bit based on time, and we do still have about 20 minutes left together. I want to draw your attention to the agenda item that we skipped, but we're just going to build it into this last part. And initially we were going to do some small group discussion to really be thinking back to what we walked through in terms of our medium-term objectives, the things that we've been learning about together, our own planning principles, and emerging opportunities that this group brings value add to. So as you're thinking about that framework and some of the presentations that we heard here today, the leadership team really wanted to facilitate a conversation around priorities, identifying opportunities for this group, thinking ahead to 2025. So we have one more meeting in 2024. You're going to hear the focus group presentation. But as we start to think about that work group structure and what are some of the projects and activities that you all would like to lean into, we want to have a conversation about that here today. So I'll turn it over to Lisa, Skip, and Venkat as we sort of shift gears and start looking forward. And Laura, maybe you could just now advance it to that final discussion slide. That one. Oh, back. Thank you. Okay. I know you're all chomping at the bit.
So I actually just have a question.
It's not on.
Okay, this is totally not rehearsed from some of my coaches here. With this group, I just want to ask the question, are there additional pieces of information or anything you feel you might need to get to the conversation around what our priorities might be or work group structure? I don't want to assume that we got it all and we know where to watch for, so just checking.
Well, I have maybe a slightly different question. So, we're gonna have the clean tech work plan, and we have the semiconductor. I guess my question is, how does this group help support the recommendations that are coming out of those documents? And do we really need to do something different, or do we need to organize ourselves to advance the goals that were established in those plans?
I always defer to healthcare. Like, we know that we're gonna be short 27,000 nurses in our state in X years, right? And so you'd have a hard data point that you can then start to write goals and imperatives around. So, like the clean tech, like, can we start to distill or decide to distill, like, some really key, like, using some data points of what we wanna focus on? Because we kind of need that. We have a North Star that's, I think, in theory or philosophy, but I don't know if we have really like succinct goals or imperatives, or maybe that's the role of the next step of the work group. But it feels succinct in healthcare. It doesn't feel as succinct maybe in the tech space.
Do people have other thoughts on certain sectors? Just staying on that topic for a second, that would be logical for us to focus on, and how we actually organize work plans and work groups.
I think it's worth noting too that with that, I don't know, if we would have had this conversation 5 years ago, would we have predicted AI? Would we have predicted in that level, would we have predicted semiconductors in that level, having conversations about nuclear energy again, like, would we have predicted all of that? Probably not. So, like, building in a structure of, this is what we're looking at right now, how do are these universals or whatever kind of like shifts and ebbs and flows that the technology sector has? Or do they feel more rigid? Do they feel more like, this is for semiconductors because we are operating under the assumption that it's gonna grow in this trajectory, in this direction, and we want to be a part of that. Which is an okay answer, usually. But does that come at the cost of ignoring other pieces of the sector that often people, so, yeah, not helpful, but a thought. Not an answer, but a question.
Maybe we wanted to take the adaptability course.
Yeah. Semiconductors end up in advanced manufacturing.
One thought I have from just leading from the previous discussion on employability is the applicability to the technology sector. So I just wear my NVIDIA hat for a moment and I think about all these employability skills. To me, the two that really stand out are the resilience aspect of it, which is you make a mistake, you learn from that mistake, you don't do it again, but you improve, right? And then the second one is the collaborative aspect of complex problem solving, because a single person can't really solve the technology problem. And so it really helps us to get together on a whiteboard and do a problem solving session, then we can make progress. I don't know if that's pervasive across the tech sector, but I think that would be a useful data point for us as we look at these objectives, and maybe we need a work group for that. You have a better idea of that, or maybe you can gather some data from partners at the AO.
I was just going to say that some of the employability skills that, in addition to the two that Ben Kat mentioned, that kind of leap out in terms of past years' surveys and conversations. Another one is initiative, or it's often captured as an entrepreneurial mindset. And so even in large corporations in technology, people are looking for folks who are able to take initiative, and they're more likely to have successful outcomes in their careers, even in large organizations, with that sort of approach. And there's probably a couple others out of the long list that was provided earlier that might be a little bit more relevant to tech or more emphasized. But yeah, that's another one that consistently comes up big. I mean, the survey we did last year with this group, that set of employability skills was really important alongside some of the more technical skills related to data and also thinking about things like cybersecurity and some of these emerging and growing disciplines, trends. And I was also going to say that another key aspect of employability skills that came up in that survey was the ability to process a lot of information and recognize signal from noise. And I think that's going to be increasingly important when we need to essentially not entirely trust all AI results, at least for the time being. And so, again, that's another one that kind of jumps out.
Skip, can I share something on that real quick? I wanted to share with you guys that I heard consistently from industry exactly what you guys were just talking about, and it made me think, gosh, if you're ever doing a project and you could video some pieces of it, that'd be great. Because they said, Intel was one that said, we lose great people because we start giving them feedback. And the only reason we give them feedback is because we think their idea is great and it could potentially stand the test of time. But we start giving that feedback, and then it's like the ghosting, like they're gone. And it's like, what happened to that person? And then they run into them later, and it's like, why'd you leave? And well, I didn't think they liked my project. And it's like, no, we actually loved your project, and that's the only reason we were willing to take the time and give you that feedback. But that is not how it happens in school. They all get feedback anyway, so they don't understand that distinction. And that is one of those places where this group of people in here could help with some of those kinds of things, that feedback. Initiative, just so you know, it's in self-awareness, because you got to have that self-awareness to take that initiative, so it is in there.
Any other thoughts, questions on this? One thing that came up in the conversation a couple weeks ago with folks in Boston was also looking at not just AI in climate, but also healthcare and bioscience came up. Those were three sectors that were potentially either incredibly disruptive or transformative and cross-cutting across sectors, right? Every sector, including manufacturing, has to deal with human health and wellness of its employees, also has to deal with automation and AI, also has to deal with energy and climate-related inputs and sustainability. And so those were three. And if you look at Massachusetts again as an example, those are three areas where they have multi-billion-dollar initiatives that they're investing in that are all relatively recent. And a big part of those initiatives is workforce.
I will share with the group here, but I just met with a friend who, for years, she made her millions from the Gulf War. She's an electrical engineer in Idaho. Micron and her have partnered. She just spent the last couple of years in Dubai. So EAU hired her to set up these STEM schools, and she brought her her STEM ecosystem, and she has an international ecosystem. But it's really fascinating. I'm just looking at what she sent me on Saturday, the advanced technology programs that all these schools in the UAE are adding is alternative energy projects, robotics, AI, machine learning, digital design. They went deep in Dubai where they set it up for the American schools and the Ministry of Education. So then they've set up the economics, the Future Ready is what it's called in STEM, and then what the Ministry of Education adopts, and then what has to happen in the school system and how it then goes down K-12 all the way to university. But I think the 8 advanced technology programs that the UAE chose could cross over to Oregon. I mean, we're all in the same boat, right? And I just think, I don't know if we want to get to that level for Future Ready Oregon in this committee, But I do think we need some insights, or what are the tech programs that we want to stand up? So I'll send this presentation to you. And it goes to leadership workshops, teacher workshops, industry. I mean, it kind of pulls it together for us in a really fast PowerPoint.
Question?
If I can just interject, kind of from the Department of Education perspective, because there's a lot of talk, of, especially today, of the recognition that K-12 is kind of the first pipeline in the employment pipeline, right? It's the first step, is K-12 education before anything else. And right now, our districts are looking at new technologies, and a lot of what we're talking about on this workforce consortium, and do not have the expertise to develop policy to help drive the direction that their districts are going to go in terms of how do they, one, use it as an educational tool in their institution, but also how is it part of the curriculum that they're providing to students to make sure that their students are prepared with those skill sets for the workforce. So I think one simple thing that this consortium could do is look at how are we helping to provide guidance for districts to develop policies to implement this technology in their structures as a district, as well as in the classroom for their teachers. Because that's what we're hearing the most at ODE is we want to create an AI policy for our district, but we do not have the expertise to create an AI policy. And so right now, a lot of it is we're just going to ban stuff because we don't understand it and fear it, versus approaching it from that, let's use this as a tool and empower our students and empower our teachers. So looking at priorities and structure, I would say from a education standpoint, getting industry input and getting those that are experts in this technology to help ODE develop guidance that we can provide to districts so that they can implement, use, and teach this technology, I think would be a huge win, and something that our districts would say would be at the forefront of their priorities to help prepare students with these skill sets.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. Also, again, referring back to the Boston conversations a couple weeks ago, there was a serial entrepreneur from Boston that had a lot of success and he did consulting with a lot of different sort of economic development groups and tech trade associations and other folks involved in innovation. He said, honestly, in his experience, the one thing that he could potentially use as a region to vault ahead of another would be to figure out how AI is going to transform K-12 and potentially beyond, but K-12 in particular, like the state that gets that right, even if we're way behind as we are in some metrics at the K-12 level relative to other states, it doesn't matter if we can solve for this particular inflection point because we can vault ahead. And he was like, every parent who has a kid is going to want to be in that school system or in that district. And anyone who wants to have kids one day is going to be wanting to be there. So talk about amazing talent attraction long term that's going to attract companies, solve for K-12.
And once again, I wouldn't say ODE is the expertise. So we would like to leverage our partnerships with the industry experts to help us to help those districts.
You know, I think the focus on K through 12 is great, but also going back to our earlier discussion about how the new employees with AI are quickly closing the gap with the older employees without AI. How do we start to get the older employees, I'll count myself in that for another year, how do we get them up to speed on AI so that we're not losing this existing workforce, or we're not getting the most out of that existing workforce? So what about the educational opportunities that can be provided for the seasoned employee?
Yep.
This is where MedCat promotes NVIDIA's new program with the state of California and the community colleges there. Yeah, Intel has a program like that too. Yeah.
I think, one of the things I've been advocating for is a foundational course in AI that just teaches people the very basics, which is how you train a neural network, how to deploy it to solve a particular problem, and just proliferate that through the talent pipeline. K-12 community colleges or public colleges and universities, and then even at the workplace itself. So some tools to do this. There's a Deep Learning Institute, there are educator kits that are being provided to schools and colleges. But and the recent example of California, which actually happened 1 hour away, but I wanted to evaluate that program that Lisa's done and see if it's something that can be adopted for Oregon as well. So I can help with some of that. But to your point, Jeff, I think your idea is a good one. We should try to collaborate with ODE to at least influence policy. I'm not very good at navigating government, but at least from the perspective of how the technology can be used as a tool, I'm happy to share some ideas. But I need somebody's help to develop the policy.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, back to the original question of like, what do we need? What do maybe some of us need to like help get aligned with this? Like just to bounce off what Venkat just said, like also not good at navigating the governmental like constraints and or workflows and all of that. So I think maybe a level setting conversation for us, those of us that don't necessarily know how all of this works. Like if it's our goal to create action items and create programs and move those things forward. Is it to influence policy? Is it to, X, Y, Z? What's our, or is that going to be something that we're going to determine in the moment while we continue these conversations of what would be the best path? So, and if so, like how can I help and how can I support? Because the wheels of government, I find, I like watching The West Wing, but I don't know how. That might be more of a Sorkin thing than a government thing.
That's so great. I think some of this conversation, when we think of the value proposition of the industry consortia, the sweet spot really is at the nexus between education and employment and things that benefit from a statewide lens and this shared leadership approach where we have industry and education and community at the table talking together. And I think you all have elevated some really great examples of, now I'm thinking in terms of a Venn diagram of like some examples of things that sit right in that value added sweet spot. And so my recommendation, and I talked with a couple of you about this, but maybe we advance some sort of a really simple survey amongst the membership of like, here are some ideas, some things that we heard from you, give you an interim opportunity to voice other ideas that may come up, and then really put some structure around this at our October meeting. Laura, if you go to the next slide, it's just a great way to wrap us up that our next meeting is October 30th. We are talking about trying to have that in a non-Portland, Salem location. We'll work on that in the near term and get you that information as soon as possible. But I think we'll hear the focus group report at that meeting. I do think there's an opportunity for us to dive into the statewide talent assessment and the technology pieces of that, what that uncovered a little bit more, and then this conversation about what are the educational programs that we have, what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, and then what are some existing efforts, Andrew, to your point earlier, like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's no reason for this group to do, initial or primary work where another group has already done great work. But how can we bring the unique value of this table to that work? And so with some nods, I think there's an opportunity for us to do some interim, maybe just outreach with each of you to build some of that framework that then we can bring to the October meeting and give you something to react to. Does that feel good? All right.
There's a way we can do pre-reads too. That might help us and spend more of the time on the interconnection in the room.
Yeah, I love that. So if we can get you something in advance,
Right.
get some feedback from y'all, and then get something back to you so it's iterative.
That's essentially what I was saying. It feels like the survey and hearing from employer voices are really going to illuminate some of the challenges, barriers, and opportunities.
Yeah.
That would inform us.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for your patience with the tech challenges today. Thank you to the team for sticking with it, and we'll figure it out. But thank you all so much. This was a great discussion today. And thank you, Dr. Bull, for the space. It's beautiful.